One of the very important things that we have to care about now is planning. From now on, any organization has to have a very well-defined way of making plans for the organizations, making plans specifically to discover and capitalize on opportunities and to anticipate some challenges, some problems. And once we identify problems or challenges, we've got right away to start ways to solve these problems, and or at least minimize them in the future. So the strategy to take advantage of the changes in the future is to plan and to plan and to plan. It's very, very important. Unfortunately, we cannot plan now because of the speed of technology. Planning horizon is getting a little bit shorter. So at least we have to have a plan for 5 years and 3 years and 1 year and so on and so forth, with the purpose of discovering opportunities and estimating some challenges and problems and try to solve them.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from La Universidad Tecnológica de Nezahualcóyotl in Nezahualcóyotl in the state of Mexico in Mexico.
The question is the following. How can we attract world investors for them to come and invest in my company? What are the factors that I have to exploit and take advantage of in order to be attractive for other people and for the world? How can I be assertive and be interested more in people, and how can I become attractive?
Okay, that is again very good question. One of the very important things for a foreign investor to look at is stability and political stability. Political stability is very, very important, beside, of course, economic opportunities that you can present to him. So what you should do is that try to study, and we have a model that I worked on, with the relationship between the business and the environment. So the business has to work very, very hard in creating and in supporting and giving impetus to the government to be a little bit more stable, and because that will be the first question that the foreign investor will be asking. I'm going to put my money there. How can I be sure that my money is safe, and how can I be sure that my return and my initial investment will be returned to me safely in my own country and my own currency? So we have to look at the political stability and the role of business in creating and enhancing political stability. Number two, of course, the question of the international debt problem, as I mentioned in my presentation, is a very important question. So you can invite the foreign investor by showing him that we have a little bit more political stability than before. Number two, or less political risk if you wish. Number two, you can work with him on getting back his profit or his money, not necessarily in hard currency, but maybe in product of your company. In other words, the foreign investor could work with you by investing money and taking from your product for marketing overseas enough to cover his profit and his capital depreciation.
Our next question is from Peru. It is from La Universidad Ricardo Palma in the city of Lima in Peru.
Dr. Khalil, good morning. To what degree does internet and artificial intelligence can be applied to the hotel now that Peru is really very much undertaking this kind of activity, the tourism business?
Thank you. Good morning to you. Internet is really a very, very important phenomena for Peru and for any other country. And it is coming. And now we are talking about the second phase of Internet, or the second Internet style, if you wish. We can apply Internet and use Internet for enhancing not only tourism, but many other activities. But when you talk about tourism, you can use the Internet. Of course, every tourist facility that you have should be hooked to the Internet. You can use it as advertisement. You can use it as contact with the potential user of your facilities. And you can use the Internet also as a means of raising funds, if you so desire, to enhance and improve and enlarge your tourist facilities. So it's a very interesting tool and very important tool, and this is the tool of the future. So please be aware of that and try to learn as much as you can about it, and try to use as much as you can about it.
Dr. Gold.
Another use that we're finding for the Internet in tourism and many other industries is through training. In fact, many of your larger industries are developing intranets, that is, internets within the organization or confined to the organization by security measures. And you can provide training for hotels, for offices throughout a country from a central area. You can track the training that's been taken. They can be interactive and so on. So I think the potential for training, the use of the internet or intranets for training has just been tapped.
Thank you. Our next question, I believe, is in English. It is coming from Panama, from La Universidad Tecnológica de Panama in Panama City, Panama.
Oh, but this is from the Panama Canal Commission. Good morning. Our question is, what is the true motivator for rich countries to pardon the debts of poor countries?
Dr. Khalil?
That's a very, very interesting question. The rich countries, the lender countries, have a lot of funds being loaned to the borrower countries. Latin America carries a lot of these loans, if you wish. Now, for the last about 10 years, since the dawn of the the international debt crisis start showing, most of the financial institutions and most of the government that have made these loans have been preparing, and most of them are, of course, in the United States, Europe, and Japan, have been preparing for this, for the day that these countries might not be able to pay. It's not to the best interest of these countries or to the lender countries if these countries are, if you wish, quote unquote, delinquent or bankrupt, if you wish. So I see a trend that we will be, most of these financial institutions and most of this government will try to pardon, if not all of the loans, but part of it. In other words, convert these loans into grants, if you wish. Particularly when our tax system here in the United States, at least, can allow these institutions, if they are private institutions such as banks, can allow them to write off some of these losses, if you wish, on the loans. Now, for them to do that will be, I have a model, and I'll be glad to share it with you later on. I call it the win-win situation model. So the financial institutions should try to alleviate the financial pressure on the other countries, because these countries are clients, if you wish, to the financial institution in a way, and allow them to lighten their burden, the burden of the international debt, so that they can grow and continue to be clients and viable clients for the United States and for these financial institutions.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from El Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic, in the city of Tepic in the state of Nayarit, Mexico.
My name is Silvia Aragon. I would like to ask you this question. What is your opinion about what is being said, about what is healthy and recommendable? Whether is it good really to have some conflict within organizations? To what extent is this good to have conflict or dissension with dissent between in the midst of an organization?
Dr. Gold?
Well, conflict is in and of itself is not good nor bad. When conflict is of ideas, when conflict is concerning productivity, it can be very positive and it can be very stimulating. Conflict becomes bad or negative or destructive when it's conflict within personalities or between people where there's another agenda, where someone is trying to best the other person. But when conflict is really can be the best form of brainstorming, and as such can be very positive. So it depends on how it is used, how it is employed in the organization.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from the Secretario de Educación Pública y Cultural del Estado de Sinaloa, the state of Sinaloa in the country of Mexico.
Very much is being said about the globalization of business and the economies, and also about individuals. Undoubtedly, this also impacts greatly all the educational institutions and systems. So the question is, how does this affect the educational systems in the different countries, and toward what should the education be oriented in an increasingly globalized society?
Dr. Khalil?
Well, I believe always that globalization will bring with it, of course, the globalization of in education. However, when we talk about globalization of education in particular, or social globalization, this does not mean that we should throw away the good stuff that we have and adopt the global stuff, if you wish. We should be aware of the fact that we have in our education system some very good sides of it, and we should try to when we go globalization, we should try to, if you wish, pick and choose so that we can strengthen our system and still keep it global, if you wish.
Dr. Golden?
I might add that the technology that's available allows us to do exactly what Dr. Khalil is saying, that we can pick and choose within our countries from the entire world what we would like to include in our curriculum. So I think it's exactly correct. We don't want to homogenize education around the world, but on the other hand, there are strengths from every country that we can now access immediately. And so I think the schools need to be certainly teaching their students, and their instructors need to be quite proficient in the use of technology, not only proficient but comfortable with the use of technology as a tool, as a pencil, as a blackboard, or as anything else.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from the La Universidad de Sonora in the city of Hermosillo in the state of Sonora in Mexico.
Sonora. Greetings from Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. This is a question for Dr. Khalil. In all societies in the world, you see a level of corruption, and I agree with you that more in closed societies there is more corruption. But there is the time of transition of a society from a closed society to an open one. There is a social cost that you have to pay for this transformation and this transition toward this other open society. What are the factors or strategies that you think that we as normal citizens and the universities of these countries to have to mitigate this high price to pay for becoming a more open society and eliminate corruption?
The price, first of all, the price should be a peaceful price. In other words, we should use dialogue, We should use education. We should use openness. We should accept each other's point of view, and gradually open our society so that the change could be effected, and what I refer to as corruption could be minimized, if you wish, without any social upheaval or costly social problems. So education plays a very significant role, and openness in our minds, if you wish, and using the internet and using the new technology, and being open to new ideas. And one of the very important things of being open is to be open without violence, without trying to force each other person to your point of view, but educate yourself, educate him, and then once we do that, the chances are very, very good that our economies will become more open, and the corruption that most of the countries are suffering from will be less.
Our next question is from Bolivia. It is from La Universidad Privada Boliviana in the city of Cochabamba in Bolivia.
A greeting for the speakers and the moderator, and I would like to hear your opinion as far as what role does an individual play within this globalization process, and how does this result affect the fundamental rights of the people, of the human rights or the rights of the individual?
Dr. Khalil?
The individual is the most important element in this equation. We should start with the individual. If we give the individual the freedom to express his opinions, if we educate the individual, and if we don't put any strains or stress on the individual will achieve all the goals that we want, as long as his goals and the goals of the society do not conflict. And if they are different, as my colleague have said, we solve these differences by dialogue. So the individual is very important to me. He is the pivotal element of the equation. Let us take care of the individual through education, through giving him security to express his opinion, through giving him the chance to grow in his thinking, and if that happens, and if he's mature enough, then the opportunities will be great.
Dr. Golden?
I just might add that when the change begins with the individual, when the individual is included in the process from the beginning, those are the changes, in fact, that are the most long-lasting. So I would certainly reinforce what Dr. Khalil has said, that change should begin with the individual.
Thank you very much. Let us begin with Module 2, in which Dr. Golden will discuss predicting the sources of resistance to change and techniques for reducing such resistance.
Thank you. Dr. Khalil has very accurately outlined the major changes that have been occurring on a global scale. Most of these challenges have been met peacefully between countries and within organizations. Unfortunately, we hear most in the media about challenges that have resulted in destructive conflicts. Some authors claim that conflict itself is not necessarily bad. Others even talk about positive conflict, telling us that conflict is necessary for productivity. And some indicate that people, companies, and nations that are interdependent are always in a state of dynamic conflict. However you view it, conflict does seem to be a natural outcome of change. It is only when change is poorly managed that conflict results in the destruction of relationships, of families, of companies, and of nations. Handled well, it can result in the opportunities Dr. Khalil described. In my presentation, I would like to move from Dr. Khalil's macro or world view of change to a micro or intensive look at the impact of these changes on the individuals within our organizations. All of these global trends have created significant changes in the lives of workers and communities all over the world. And if you've been a manager or an administrator for very long, you know that change doesn't come easily to organizations. Conflict in the form of resistance almost always accompanies organizational change, even when it's planned. I often talk with MBA students and new managers who assert that if change is carefully and scientifically planned, there will be no resistance and therefore no conflict. This is what psychologists call wishful thinking. To deny the possibility of resistance in the face of the tremendous social, organizational, and technical changes that we are asking our employees to make can be very incautious. Ignoring the potential for resistance and conflict can doom the most well-organized and well-intended change program to a long, drawn-out demise. In today's conference, I would like to focus on resistance to planned change. My objectives are twofold. One, to increase your awareness of and ability to predict sources of resistance to change. And two, to provide some practical techniques or strategies to reduce resistance to change. Rick Maurer in Beyond the Wall of Resistance indicates that 50 to 70% of all restructuring and quality management initiatives fail, most often because they do not take into account resistance to change. That's over half of our change efforts fail due to resistance. Michael McManus, in Surviving Merger and Acquisition, asserts that 50 to 60% of mergers fail as a result of placing financial considerations first while giving only passing attention to psychological concerns. Now, many of us have seen extremely elegant, richly funded, and well-intended change programs fail to sustain their long-term objectives when personal, structural, environmental, and cultural resistance were underestimated. The unfortunate result, of course, is that our workers who have lived through numerous failed programs during their careers have become jaded to new initiatives. If you listen carefully, you will even hear workers groan when management announces yet another change program that promises to make their lives more productive and easier. The first lesson for today, therefore, is that whenever you are considering any type of change program, no matter how well intended, you should anticipate resistance. Resistance is predictable, and thus we can develop strategies to deal with it in our planning. Military strategists know well that going into battle without an estimate of the strength of the enemy's ability to resist is foolhardy. This is true even when the change program appears benign and in the best interests of all concerned. And if you are attempting change in a large bureaucratic organization, you should probably assume, even after considerable study, that you are underestimating the forces of resistance, but perhaps two or even threefold. Now, this does not mean that you should not undertake change. This means that you should not be discouraged when things don't go as smoothly as you had hoped. Be prepared for resistance. To better predict resistance to change, I would like to categorize it into four types: personal, structural, cultural, and environmental. It may be helpful to think of these as four brick walls that stand in the way of the change that you are hoping to incorporate in your organization. The thickness and strength of the wall may vary depending upon the nature and amount of change required. And even though these walls may be invisible, they are very real and they are very present. The first brick wall I would like to describe is personal resistance to change. With few exceptions, most humans are reluctant, unwilling, or at times unable to change long-held beliefs, values, behaviors, or habits, unless the benefits are obvious overwhelming, and immediate. Or the cost of not changing is threatening, unsavory, or even catastrophic. This is basically human nature. Most people are comfortable with what they are familiar with, even when the familiar is disagreeable. Change can be threatening and is not always welcomed. For instance, many of us have learned the hard way that we can't easily change our mate's little disagreeable habits. Attempting to influence a teenager's decision to pierce or tattoo their skin, as many of you know, can be fraught with conflict. Announce to your employees that they will have to give up an old computer software program and learn a new one. And you may also get a taste of resistance. The second lesson for today is therefore that successful spouses, parents, and employers have learned over time that it is far easier to change oneself than another person. And if you must change the other person, be prepared for some conflict. It is human nature to resist change when it is perceived as threatening to some valued self-interest. In the workplace, change programs may disrupt important relationships. Long-standing routines may be turned upside down. Although harder to define, perhaps feelings or emotions such as self-esteem, status, adequacy, worth, and autonomy may be threatened by innovation. All of these may trigger significant resistance to change without consideration of the positive impact the new program may confer in the long run. Of course, one can always simply ignore resistance and impose change on others by virtue of superior authority or superior power. This is a tactic appropriately employed in a true crisis or when faced by a significant threat. Unfortunately, it is often resorted to out of lack of understanding or impatience. And as any psychologist or parent can tell you, you can force people to change. But if you do, be prepared for all kinds of unintended and unforeseen side effects or repercussions. For example, if an authority mandates, manipulates, or coerces employees to change, it can result in reduced morale, reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, product sabotage, rebellion, strikes, all types of passive-aggressive behavior and political game playing. So, lesson number 3 for today is, we typically overestimate the ability to be flexible to change and underestimate the tendency to resist change. The next type of resistance to change, or brick wall, I would like to discuss is the resistance that lies within the structure of the organization itself. The way most organizations are structured or organized can create resistance to change. Think about your own organization. If you really wanted to create significant change, how many policies would have to be changed? How many individuals dislocated? And how many new processes developed? Lesson number 4. Organizations are conservative by design and nature. Their ultimate goal is survival. Significant change most often will come about only when the organization's survival is threatened. Long-established organizations, in fact, take on a life of their own. As contrasted with human beings, the older an organization is, the less likely it will die a natural death. The goal of survival can supersede the corporate mission. In fact, organizations have been known to change their mission, their very reason for being, if competition or regulation threatens their survival. This is, of course, common in the private sector as companies market new products, enter new arenas, merge, divest themselves in order to survive the threat of competition. This survival mechanism operates in the public sector as well. When the successful attainment of the organization's goals can threaten survival. I'll give you an example. The March of Dimes, a philanthropic organization devoted to improving the health of babies and reducing infant mortality in the United States. It was created out of the ashes of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis after the Salk vaccine virtually eliminated that threat of infantile paralysis, which was its original mission. The structure of an organization almost always resists threats to the status quo, to vested interest, to the established power systems, and those who benefit from them. These conservative elements include the hierarchical chain of command as outlined in the organizational chart, formal communication channels, and all the established reward systems of the organization, such as salary, promotion, benefits, staffing, rules of tenure, vesting, and profit sharing. These structural elements also include regulatory systems, such as personnel policies, discipline processes, and standard operating procedures. A classic on misguided change efforts that fail to take into account the impact of organizational structure is a favorite of mine by John Kerr called On the Folly of Rewarding A While Hoping for B. All of the resources I mentioned are noted in the bibliography that has been distributed to you as part of your participants' manuals. This resistance is not based on the personality of the office holder, but is built into the organizational structure itself. It supersedes the individual who occupies a position in an organization, and rather is inherited by that position as he or she assumes the position. The third brick wall of resistance can be found in the organization's culture, or sometimes we think of subculture. Organizational culture refers to the widely held and firmly established values, beliefs, norms, and attitudes of the employees. The structure of an organization represents the formal operating procedures. The organizational culture reflects the informal rules of the organization. Culture also provides checks and balances and constraints on change within an organization. Culture is an expression of the realities of everyday organizational life. A particular organization's culture is more often learned by employees through discussions, during coffee breaks, through gossip, rather than through orientation meetings, policy manuals, and posted mission statements. It is transmitted to the employee through the actions of co-workers and bosses, not through speeches and not through company slogans. For instance, many of us are acutely and perhaps even painfully aware that an accurate understanding of corporate culture can be very important to getting along in an organization. We usually learn in our first year on a new job who really has the power in an organization, what behaviors are rewarded, and how things really get done. Widely held beliefs such as, for instance, no one gets fired around here, or another one, whatever you do, don't make waves. Don't mind your manager, just be nice to her assistant, and you've got it made around here. Or lastly, just nod your head and then do what you want. No one cares anyway. These are cultural examples of potential resistance to change. Consider how these four statements, how these beliefs could hinder a new employee incentive plan, for instance. This leads us to our next lesson. Managers tend to be much less attuned to the culture of their organization and more attuned to its stated mission and organizational chart. They therefore can underestimate the power of the existing culture to resist the change programs that they initiate. Now, the fourth and last type of resistance or brick wall I would like to discuss are what are called environmental constraints. Environmental constraints are those forces outside of the organization that create resistance to organizational change. These constraints include the cultural values and beliefs of the society in which the organization resides. For instance, a rending company attempting to sell horse flesh for human consumption in the United States would be met with far more cultural resistance than in some other countries. There are environmental constraints on innovations or ventures that appear to threaten the common good, such as nuclear power plants, waste disposal. Environmental threats to a local neighborhood are resisted by what we call now not in my backyard groups. Countless local, city, state, and federal regulatory agencies, committees, boards, and governments exist as restraints to change. The local or global economy and competition, of course, are also examples of environmental constraints. Accrediting agencies, licensing bodies, laws, codes, and legislations are other examples of constraints that come from outside of the organization or imposed on the organization. National or international unions, the legal system, and the news media can play a major role in constraining organizational change. Now, I know there may be, of course, significant exceptions and objectives to these four barriers for change, and I'm sure you've thought of some. For instance, one exception or objection you could validly make is that, yes, there are individuals with high levels of security, initiative, or a sense of adventure that do not automatically feel threatened by change. They tend to welcome change. They feel challenged by change and will actively support change initiatives. These individuals are very important to identify within your organization. Also, organizational structures can provide mechanisms for honest feedback and communication, with formal rewards in place for innovation, for creativity, and risk-taking. Structures as these will facilitate change efforts rather than hinder them. In organizations where past change efforts have been handled well and have created positive experiences, an organizational culture will develop that is supportive or unafraid of change. And lastly, environmental forces may actually encourage organizational change and innovation, such as, for instance, federal and state automobile safety and emission control regulations. Now, when all of these positive forces for change line up together, you have a very powerful and successful organization. A second objection you might correctly make is